So welcome all to our Mishnah Berakhot study. It's exciting that we're on chapter 6 and there are 9 chapters. So that means that we have 2 more Zooms after this, and then you have to register for convention. So what you could be together with us for our Siyum at convention when we finish chapter 9 with Rabbi Cheryl Peretz. So it's been very exciting. I love going around and telling people about our program, especially now that many are doing Daf Yomi, the study of Talmud each day, and it's exactly Berakhot now too. So it complements it, and if you've been doing Daf Yomi, and if you've been doing our Mishnah Berakhot, you can see how you've studied this before. So this evening we'll be studying chapter 6, and now I'm going to mute everybody. But you've been all very good. Been very quiet, but I'm going to unmute Rabbi Barmash. But I am going to introduce her. Not the same way I did the last time. So Rabbi Pamela I would do the same thing, say the same thing though. Rabbi Pamela Barmash also has a PhD, has served on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly since 2003 and is now its co-chair. And I believe the first time a woman has been a co-chair. Yes. She also serves on the Joint Beit Din of the Conservative Movement since 2008, which is also a huge accomplishment. She's co-chair of the New Disabilities Inclusion Committee of the Rabbinical Assembly. She was a rabbi at Temple Shari Tefillah in Norwood, Massachusetts for 8 years. She taught at the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem for many summers. She received her BA from Yale, her rabbinic ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and her PhD from Harvard. Rabbi Barmash is a professor of Hebrew Bible at Washington University of St. Louis and has served as director of Jewish, Islamic, and Near Eastern Studies there. And in addition, she has published some books on law and justice, her book Homicide in the Biblical World, as well as Exodus and the Jewish Experience, Echoes and Reverberations. She edited volume of hers is the Oxford Handbook of Biblical Law, which was just published, and another book, The Laws of Hammurabi at the Confluence of Royal and Scribal Traditions, will be published this summer by Oxford University Press. I still want to say that she's probably one of the smartest people I have ever met, and we all look forward to studying with Rabbi Barmash this evening. There is a chat if you want to ask any questions, or that you can write there or raise your hand. And Rabbi Barmash, it's all yours. I'm going to mute myself as well.
All right, well, thank you very much, Rabbi Wollensfields. I very much enjoyed the last time I met with your Mishnah Berakhot group. And so it's been a lot of fun. And so we're really ready to begin. I know that up to this point, you've been dealing in Mishnah Berakhot with the liturgical prayers. And so today we're talking about the brachot for food. And so I want to start with some overall questions. And the first question is, how does saying brachot before and after we eat enhance our spirituality? And so I'm actually going to throw it open. And so I'm going to ask Rabbi Wollensfields to unmute. But think about what happens to you. What do you feel? What do you experience when you say a bracha before eating and or a bracha after eating? What does it do to your spiritual life, if anything?
Do we raise our hands or just speak?
Just start speaking.
Okay. Hello, Rabbi Barmash. It's Greta Rafsky.
Oh, nice to see you.
From Shari Tefillah many years ago. It creates a connection. It's not just hand-to-mouth physical action. It creates a connection in a spiritual way. It raises awareness and consciousness that there was a provider of this food and that there is something to be gained from expressing gratitude for being able to eat the food that was provided To me, that's the before eating. And I found it was easier for me to answer that question rather than the other one, which is what you get from after you eat. It's the same, but there's more. It's a way to then feel grateful for having eaten, having been provided sustenance. And I just find it harder to engage in the Birkat Hamazon as frequently as I might engage in a bracha before eating.
All right, that's fascinating. So thank you, really enhances us, to be cognizant of where our food is coming from, how it's grown, that it just doesn't appear in and of itself in our stores. And so that's really fantastic. But it's also interesting to see the differences in regard to saying brachot before or after. And so we'll get that when I ask the overall question number 2. Anyone else have any thoughts about what it's like to say brachot before or after we eat? How does that enhance our spirituality? What does that do to us?
I think it makes us more mindful.
Right. I mean, because sometimes we eat without sort of really thinking about who prepared it, where it came from. And so it helps us be more mindful, to have intention and to think more deeply. Thank you.
I think it can slow us down a little bit so that we don't just rush into a meal and not think about it. Sometimes you eat so automatically and you're not even aware.
And that makes a lot of sense, and that's even more so in the time we live in, where we're so distracted. We have our phones and our blogs and our Twitter and our Instagram and a gazillion other things. And so for us to focus and think about what we're doing is in general important, and even more specific when it comes to something that's so daily part of our routine, such as eating. Thank you. So then I asked in the study guide another overall question, which is about, and it's something interesting. Our tradition considers reciting brachot after the meal to be more significant than reciting brachot before eating, right? And the way you can tell that in one way is, as you probably noticed, Birkat Hamazon is a lot longer than those one-line brachot, right? So just in terms of the sheer number of words, that tells you that our tradition thinks it's more important. But the second thing is that rabbinic tradition considers reciting a bracha after eating to be Torah in origin, that is derived from the Torah, right? Rather than the idea that brachot before for specific foods are just a rabbinic tradition. So it's interesting to contemplate that and think about, why might it be that our tradition thinks that reciting brachot after the meal is more important or more significant than reciting brachot before eating. And I wonder if anyone might have any speculation, reflection, argumentation, contradiction.
I was wondering if it had to do with feeling satisfied, and that when you're satisfied, you've eaten, you're not starving anymore, you're not hungry anymore, you've been fulfilled, and it's easier to be in, at least for me, in a state of gratitude in some ways when I've been fulfilled.
Okay.
There's
So,
something about being satisfied.
Right. And maybe that's why, afterwards is longer, because if we had something long before we're eating, we would go, oh, forget it, let's just eat. Right? One sentence, that's about as much as we can tolerate. Right?
I think of
but afterwards you have time to reflect. Yes?
I think of a weird analogy, the verse from Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, Tov Shem Mishem and Tov, I'll translate it, V'yom Hayavet Mavet Miyom Hivaldo, a good name is better than precious oil and a day of death better than the birthday, because on your birth, you don't know what's going to happen in the person's life. It's almost like at the beginning of the meal, you don't know how satisfactory or how good the food's going to be. So at the end, you can bless it because you know how it tasted, if it was good or not. I find it a weird analogy that came to me, but it kind of did.
I
Well-
think at the beginning you anticipate when you finish the meal, you know you have done something to thank for. The other way is anticipation.
I see it as a form of gratitude. And, if I contrast myself to my cat, who's all sweetness and light when she wants a treat, afterwards, not so much. But, it's, well, but it's that intentionality and that recognition that you have something to be grateful for and gracious about.
I mean, that's great. I mean, in some sense, before you get something, you're full of gratitude and thankfulness that you got it. And afterwards, you're like, yeah, forget it. So it really is something to try to teach us to be grateful for what we have and not always in a state of, well, we'll be polite and respectful when we need to get something, but afterwards we can be rude.
Well, yeah, actually, that's about my cat. Yeah, it's more of I think it's a greater effort at intentionality to recognize something after the fact than beforehand.
Thank you. Okay, so we can come back to these later if we have time. Let's dive into this actually quite long chapter in the Mishnah. And what might be useful, I don't know if you have it with you, is if you have a Siddur or a Berakhot, like here's just one, I just grabbed some before, or a Siddur, something like that. If you have one nearby, that might be helpful as well. So the first Mishnayot, right? So it's actually kind of funny because the Mishnah, which is the next great Jewish book after the Bible, the term Mishnah is for the entire book, but then each individual section is also called a Mishnah. So chapter 6, Mishnah 1, starts by asking, how does one recite blessings for fruit? On fruits growing on a tree, one says, ... who created the fruit of the tree? Okay, so let's just make sure, I'm sure we all know this, but just to review, the ... that begins every bracha is what?
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
All right, right? So we all know that. So our Mishnah is assuming that you know that, right? It actually never introduces it anywhere. It already assumes that you have some background and is just going to give you the end of that bracha. So for fruit growing on a tree, one says, who created the fruit of the tree? Borei pri ha'etz, except for wine. On wine, one says, Borei pri hagefen, or Borei pri hagafen, if you're Ashkenazic. Who created the fruit of the vine? So let me ask you this, right? Why does wine receive a special bracha?
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's not. It's a question to be answered. I'm more into interaction. I don't want to lecture at you.
Isn't it because wine is a symbol of joy?
Right, because it's a symbol of joy. That's why we drink wine, on Friday night, on Shabbat afternoon, on Chagim. So it is something that our tradition holds, is something that you drink in celebration. And of course, we do that in secular culture. When you are celebrating, you might pop open a bottle of champagne or a bottle of something else, right? So there's something special about wine, and we'll see that is the case as well for bread. So our Mishnah goes on to say, on fruits growing from the earth, one says, who created the fruit of the ground, which is Borei Pri Ha'adama, except for bread. On bread, one says, Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth. Right? So let me ask you that question again, right? Why is there a special bracha for bread?
My guess would be because it's considered the staff of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and if you look at traditional societies, the type of eating that they have is that meals have at their center bread. I mean, people used to eat a lot of bread. And I want you to keep that thought in mind because we're going to come back to it when we get to Mishnah 8. Now, it's interesting, we now have the blessing for vegetables. So on vegetables, one says, Borei Pri Ha'adama, who created the fruit of the ground. And Rabbi Yehuda says, one should say instead, Borei Minei Dishaim, who created various types of herbs. And Rabbi Yehuda's idea is dismissed. It's included, but the rule follows the anonymous part of the Mishnah, so that on vegetables you say, Borei Pri Ha'adama, who created the fruit of the ground. Any speculation why there might be a disagreement about vegetables?
Because they can be eaten raw or cooked.
All right, that might be a possibility.
And the spices are only raw and, well, they're raw and cooked also, but
They
Okay,
could be
it's a
above
little
the
bit
ground and
mysterious.
below the ground.
yeah, below the ground.
Yeah, some are above the ground, some are below the ground, depends on the vegetable.
Right? I mean, it is actually a little mysterious, and quite a number of commentators have come up with explanations for why Rabbi Yehuda is disagreeing. You've come up on your own some of those explanations. Some would say that Rabbi Yehuda is actually saying that for each type of vegetable, you should say specifically who created and mention the name of that vegetable. But it's important to note here that even though the Mishnah looks like it's easy to understand, this is a mystery. It's really an interpretive puzzle. Okay. Let's look at Mishnah 2. So it says, if one blessed the fruits of the vine with who created the fruits of the ground, she or he has fulfilled his or her obligation. But if she blessed on the fruits of the ground, who created the fruits of the trees, she did not fulfill his or her obligation. So what's going on here?
Well, even trees grow from the ground, so at least you're covering trees. But if you do it the other way around, you're not covering potatoes.
That's correct, right? So that if you say fruits of the tree, like if you bless the apple with saying who creates the fruit of the ground, yeah, even trees go from the ground. And it's interesting here that rabbis don't just say, oh, you just got to do it right way, right? That they're creating some leeway, right? For people not to know. And in fact, if you've seen books of Berakhot, I know that Women's League has this book called Count Your Blessings, okay? And Rabbi Wollensfield is shaking it in front of everybody, okay? And it's a great book because it helps you understand, like, what bracha do you say over pineapple? Is it a fruit? Is it a vegetable, right? And many other sometimes mysterious fruits. And your Siddur, I just picked up this one. So this is the Sim Shalom, the weekday and Shabbat one. It also has a listing of the brachot, but it doesn't quite give you all the mysterious ones like pineapples or You know, that's what I always think of, because I think of pineapples growing on trees, but actually it's a vegetable. There you are. Okay. So then it introduces something else. In all cases, if she or he said, for everything exists by God's word, that is, the bracha ended, shehakol niyeh bidvaro, right? She or he has fulfilled his or her obligation, right? So we have this general bracha, which is shehakol niyeh bidvaro, for everything exists by God's word, right? And so one question I have is, why not use a general bracha for everything exists by God's words, shehakol niyeh bidvaro, for all food?
How long are you supposed to cook these Brussels sprouts for?
Someone said something, but I didn't hear them.
Something about Brussels sprouts, but I'm not sure if it was for dinner or for this discussion.
Excuse me, my husband wanted to know how to cook Brussels sprouts. I'll turn off my sound here.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to.
We're asking the blessing for Brussels sprouts.
To tell him which bracha he should write. Right. So it's interesting, right? The rabbis acknowledge that there's a general bracha, right? Like if you don't know what bracha to say on Brussels sprouts, okay, right? You can say shehakol niyeh bidvaro, for everything exists by God's word. But it is very clear that for other sorts of things, right, you really should acknowledge if something has grown on a tree, right? Or if it's a vegetable, right? Or grown from the ground, or if it's bread, right? Versus wine, okay? We're now on chapter 3.
Can you come here, please?
Right, and now we get something very interesting. For a thing which does not grow from the earth, we say that general blessing, shehakol niyeh bidvaro, for everything exists by God's word. On vinegar and on unripe fruits and on locusts, say shehakol niyeh bidvaro, for everything exists by God's words. Okay. Now, for those of you who are a little surprised by locusts, right? If you read the laws of kosher foods in the Torah, you will see that certain types of insects are permitted. And I've heard the rumor repeatedly that there are some Yemenite restaurants in Israel that will serve you these locusts. They claim they know which locusts they are. I mean, I have to say personally, even if a locust jumped on my plate and said, eat me, I would not try it. But that's where locusts are coming from. The Mishnah continues, on milk and cheese and on eggs, say, shehakol niyeh bidvaro, again, that blessing for everything exists by God's word. And then we have this interesting statement. Rabbi Yehuda says, anything which is a cursed species should not be blessed upon. Right? And so I think what he's saying there is, you know, what is vinegar? It's wine that's gone bad. Or what are unripe fruits? Well, that's fruits that are not ripe. They've kind of not gone to that ripeness that they should. And as for locusts, they devour everything. And I think I just read in the newspaper that in Kenya right now, they're having swarms of locusts that are just eating everything. And of course, it's terrible for the people there, right? The more we can say here, but I want to continue going because there are more interesting things for us to study. So in Mishnah 4, it says, if one has before him or her many different species, Rabbi Yehuda says, if there is among them one of the 7 species, bless on that one. But the sages say, bless on whichever she or he desires. So what are the 7 species? They're actually singled out in Jewish tradition. Is anyone familiar with what the 7 species are?
Wheat, barley, pomegranates, dates, figs, grapes, and olives.
Okay, and what are they associated with? Do you know?
Bishvat.
Right, Tu
We should have
B'Shvat.
had this lesson before Tu Bishvat.
Okay, why do we eat them on Tu B'Shvat? Because they are
Grow in
considered the
Israel.
7 important crops, right, of the land of Israel. And it really tells us a lot of what people were able to cultivate in antiquity, and that these are the 7 important fruits. And so what Rabbi Yehuda says, you know, if you have different types of foods in front of you, you should privilege those that are the celebrated foods of the land of Israel. And of course, Rabbi Yehuda, he's not having much success in this chapter of Mishnah. The sages say, no, that's a nice idea, but forget it. What you really should do is just bless on whichever one you desire. Okay. Let's go to Mishnah 5. I know I'm speeding through, but I want to get to Mishnah 8. Okay. If one blessed on the wine before the meal, she or he has exempted the wine after the meal. That means if you bless on the wine before the meal and you have wine afterwards, your initial blessing extends to the blessing after the meal. Right? It's kind of like the master bracha for all the wine of the meal, even if it's after the meal. If one has blessed on the appetizer before the meal, she or he has exempted the dessert after meal from saying an additional blessing, right? So if you bless before the meal on the appetizer, that extends to the dessert after the meal. If one blessed on the bread, you have included the appetizer, that is, you've exempted the appetizer from needing an extra blessing. But if you blessed on the appetizer, guess what? You still need to say the bracha over the bread. And again, what might be the reason for that? Or what is the reason? It's not a might, it's an absolute reason, right? Because bread is, right, the staff of life, the main part of a meal. And the House of Shammai says, even if you blessed on the appetizer, that's what you soon, right? That doesn't extend to a main dish, even if it's a cooked grain dish. Okay. Let's go on to Mishnah 6. Right? If people sit to eat, each one blesses for himself, but if they recline, one blesses for all. So should I ask you, at what meal do people recline? What does that tell us about their meal?
Pesach.
All right, so why do we recline on Passover? Why do we recline on Passover? Well, the Passover Seder developed during the Greco-Roman period. And I don't know if any of you have watched, I don't know, I, Claudius or Gladiator or any of those movies or videos or TV series or mini series or video series, right? In the Roman period, when people had a meal together, right? What did they do? They stretched out on the couch, right? And ate that way. So here, if you just sit to eat in the Roman period, right, you're just eating by yourself. Maybe there could be somebody sitting next to you, but it's not the sense of a communal meal. But if people recline, that means that they're having a communal meal, right? And so in that case, one person can recite the brachot for everybody. And here it's also interesting. It then goes and says, if wine comes in during the meal, each one blesses for himself or herself. After the meal, one person can recite the blessing for all. Right? So here it really shows you drinking habits, that the drinking habit is, right, that if you drink wine during the meal, each person is kind of drinking their own wine separately. And their custom was only after the meal did people share a bottle or a flask, or I always think of it as a sort of a clay jar filled with wine. Right? And then we have one more interesting thing about how they would have meals in the Greco-Roman times, in the time of the Mishnah. And he says it on incense, even though incense is not brought until after the meal. And this is an interesting custom that people had in those days, is that after the meal or after the food, to kind of bring the meal to a delightful close, they would bring in burning incense as a nice smell with which people could end their meal, right? So that's not something we do, right? But it's a fascinating custom that people used to enjoy at the end of the meal, a nice smell. I mean, maybe it's like, we don't do this anymore because of the ill effects of smoking, but we're certainly familiar that, people used to have a meal and afterwards they would go smoke their pipes, right? Or maybe the men would go off into the smoking room and then the women would go someplace else, and maybe that's only in whatever that show is that I stopped watching, Downton Abbey, right? Okay, right. So here is something of antiquity where they would also end their meal not with smoking tobacco, but with incense as a nice way to bring their meal to its end. Okay, let's go on to Mishnah 7. And here we learn more about the types of foods that they ate. If they brought before him or her salty food first and bread with it, she or he blesses on the salty food and exempt on the bread, because the bread is ancillary to the salty food. So one thing that they used to eat first is they ate a lot of things that were pickled or salted, right? That's not our way of eating. We like appetizers that are, salads or something cooked, but in their times they like salty food first, right? And then the Mishnah introduces, this is the principle, everything that is primary and has something secondary with it. So the salty food is primary, and then the bread becomes secondary, right? She or he blesses on the primary food and thereby exempts the secondary food. But if in case it's some other food, right, it's really bread that is the primary food, and that's why meals traditionally began with a bracha for bread, because that was most of the time the primary ingredient in the meal. The only thing that would take it away is a salty food. And I think I have a question. But wouldn't you have blessed the bread anyway? So what happens is, apparently, they would bring you the salty food, let's say pickles. I don't know if they had herring in antiquity. That's pretty salty. And then and only then would they eat bread, right? That's different from our meals where we have bread, that usually comes on the table first, or is already sitting on the table when we sit down. Okay, any other questions up to this point about brachot that you say before the meal? Okay, so I think then we're ready to tackle Mishnah 8, which is about Birkat Hamazon and other blessings that are said before the meal, after the meal. Okay, so let's take a look. So if you have your Siddur or your Birkon, it would be a good time to make sure you have it in your hand, because we need to understand what some of these things are. Right, so it says, one who ate figs or grapes or pomegranates blesses 3 blessings after them, according to the words of Rabban Gamliel. Okay, so let's take a look at your Siddur or your Birkon. I mean, I just kind of collected ones that I found around the house. So if you have your copy of a Birkon or a Siddur, and you can find Birkat Hamazon, you will see that it really begins. I mean, there's like everything, has introductory stuff, like the psalm at the beginning and the invitation to say Birkat Hamazon, but it really begins with the bracha, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Hazan et ha'olam kulo. That is bracha 1, right? And it ends, Baruch Atah Adonai Hazan et hakol, and I will translate that, which is Baruch, blessed are you Adonai, who nourishes all. That's bracha 1. The second bracha begins Nodeh lecha, we thank you, and ends Baruch Atah Adonai al haaretz v'al hamazon. Blessed are you Adonai for the land and for nourishment. And the third bracha begins Rachem, right? Have mercy Adonai on your people Israel, etc. And that's a pretty long bracha, and you probably have to turn a page or two, right? And that ends Baruch Atah Adonai Bonei V'Rachamav Yerushalayim. Blessed are you Adonai, who with your compassion rebuilds Jerusalem. Those are the 3 brachot of Birkat Hamazon. And you may say, wait a second, but doesn't it then go on and on and on and on? Okay, that's why that third bracha ends in the text actually saying Amen, right? So Birkat Hamazon used to end at that Amen, but well, I'm a rabbi, so I can make fun of other rabbis. We like to add more stuff, which is why it continues on in this Siddur. 1, 2, 3, 4 more pages. Okay, right? But that's why Birkat Hamazon, its original name is the 3 blessings. So Rabban Gamliel says, one who eats figs or grapes or pomegranates blesses 3 blessings after them. Okay, and the sages say 1 blessing that is the essence of 3. And this is something where you'll probably have to go a little further in your Siddur, past Birkat Hamazon, okay, past Birkat Hamazon, and then there is something that is maybe a page or a page and a half, which is the blessing that is an essence of 3. It is a shortened form of that blessing. Now, what the Mishnah doesn't say here, what it assumes you know, is the basic rule for Birkat Hamazon, that you say Birkat Hamazon for a meal that has bread at its center. That is for the types of meals that people have traditionally eaten, where its essential ingredient, its primary ingredient is bread, and you have other stuff. And here Rabban Gamliel is trying to kind of push the envelope and said, oh, if you eat figs or grapes or pomegranates, you still say Birkat Hamazon, but the other rabbis disagree with him and say, no, it's a shorter blessing. That is 1 blessing. That is the shortened version of the 3 blessings. Now, Rabbi Akiva comes and he pushes the envelope once again. And he says, even one who ate vegetables, if that was his or her food, blesses 3 blessings after it. That is Birkat Hamazon, right? So he says, even if you have a meal of vegetables, if that's your meal, right? That is a meal without bread and any other thing that can be. If it's just vegetables, you still say Birkat Hamazon. Okay? So that's an important point, and we'll hold that in the back of our heads, and we just want to finish this Mishnah. And there's even a bracha for drinking water, right? Which is Shehakol Niyeh Bidvaro, that is, that everything exists by God's words, that general bracha. And Rabbi Tarfon thinks that we should make a special blessing for water, which is Borei Nefashot Rabot, who creates many living beings. And I suspect that the reason for that is, as we know, you can't really live without water. You know, as bread is the essence of traditional meals in human societies, we also know that which every creature needs, and maybe there is some unusual creature that I don't know about, but every creature needs to drink water, to have access to water. And so for that, Rabbi Tarfon says we ought to have this special blessing, but again, we actually follow the main opinion, the anonymous opinion, which is the bracha for water, is that everything exists by God's word. Any questions up till now? I don't see anything new in the chat box. Okay. So what I would like to do now is to actually talk about Birkat Hamazon. When Rabbi Wollensfield asked me to teach chapter 6, I said, are you asking me that because that's the one chapter you don't have someone for, or because you have, you're plotting, you're colluding because you know that I wrote a tshuva about Birkat Hamazon, and maybe it's partially one and partially two?
And actually, the last chapter you taught also was about a tshuva that you wrote, because it had the discussion about women and mitzvot. So.
Okay, well, you know, as I keep on writing more tshuvot, you'll be able to get me again and again. It's actually kind of hilarious.
When we do Mishnah Kiddushin, you'll do about marriages. She just had a tshuva pass last week, I think it was, if not at the beginning of this week.
Yeah, so that's exciting as well. So let's talk about this tshuva that I wrote about Birkat Hamazon. And the reason I wrote it is for the reason that meals today have changed, right? It used to be that meals were based on bread, right? But eating habits have changed in a number of ways. One, as you know, many people have discovered that they have some sort of allergy or food intolerance to products made with gluten. And so they are avoiding gluten products, but also we are now experiencing great change in eating patterns, right? You know, there's a much wider variety of foods that we eat nowadays. We've incorporated, you know, many cultures, foods in our daily diet. I remember speaking with my mother, who said that my grandmother's great sense of adventure, and she was an immigrant to the United States, is that once a week she would make meatballs and spaghetti, right? That was her foray into international cuisine that she learned in Philadelphia, living in a neighborhood that was both Jewish and Italian, right? So she had learned from her Italian neighbors to make meatballs and spaghetti, but that was, you know, my grandmother's sole adventure into anything beyond Ashkenazi cooking. Whereas nowadays, it's very common in our kitchens to have, you know, from one night to another. You can have tacos one night, pizza the next night, and you're making something with soy sauce the following night, right? We have a great adventurousness in our cooking in a way that was not true even 50 years ago. So if we say that Birkat Hamazon is just for meals, right, that have bread in them, it means that those who are avoiding gluten, right, are never going to be saying Birkat Hamazon, right? And those people who are eating all sorts of international foods where the staple in a meal, the main part of the meal might be tofu and not bread, right, will also rarely be saying Birkat Hamazon, right? So my tshuva is about this issue because after all, as we know, a meal is more than the food alone. And I started off our study this evening with the issues of spirituality and the importance of saying brachot both before we eat and after we eat as a way of enhancing our spirituality. So just to leave aside Birkat Hamazon, right, is something that's undesirable when it's such an amazing tool for enhancing our spirituality. So I know that you have a link on the email that you received about this evening. I think it actually said that it's a link to my study guide. Actually, it's a link to the tshuva itself. And some of you have read other of my tshuva, might be amazed. It's only 17 pages, okay? The tshuva of mine that was just passed on egalitarian marriage is 43 pages. I'm sure there are some rabbis who, when they are going to print it out, will have to put some extra paper in the printer, right? So this tshuva is about how do our practices regarding Birkat Hamazon need to change in a time of changed food practices, eating practices, and also in times when we recognize the issues of gluten, whether someone has an allergy or food intolerance, or just feels that refraining from gluten makes them feel more healthy. So I think what I am going to do is, I actually have my tshuva up on my screen, and I wonder if I can be so technologically advanced to share that with you.
You should be able to just press the green share on the bottom.
Okay.
Yep, you did
All right,
it.
so is that up? Oh, actually, that's a study guide. That's not actually what I wanted to have up. All right, here we are. I just switched it. Okay. So I would say, and this may come as a surprise, this is probably my most radical tshuva of all the tshuvot I've written for the law committee. And you can tell that a little bit by noticing that it's a 2-to-1 in terms of support. That is 10 rabbis voted in favor and the reason I want to be fair to those who did not vote with me, they felt that it's so much easier just to say Birkat Hamazon is only for bread, right? Is only when you've eaten bread. And for those who are not gluten tolerant, well, you know, they can join in, but it's not for them to say. I have an issue with that, but be that as it may, okay? So here I want to, I know that just scroll past you very quickly, right? But I want to show you the basis for this. So the mitzvah of Birkat Hamazon is based on a verse in the Torah. And that verse is, and you can see it on your screen, Ve'achalta v'savata uverachta et Adonai Elohecha. When you have eaten and are satiated, you will bless the Lord your God. So our practice of Birkat Hamazon is based on that. And notice, by the way, it doesn't say when you've eaten bread, you will bless the Lord your God. It says when you have eaten and are satisfied, are satiated, you will bless the Lord your God, right? And just as we acknowledge saying brachot is very important in enhancing our spirituality. In this, you didn't know this, but you were in fact agreeing with Maimonides, right, about the importance of eating, of saying Birkat Hamazon. Okay. Now, I want to go through this. And another idea is, could something else be the basis of a meal? And even in the Talmud, this was mentioned, and you can see this in this a source that is now in the middle of your page, right? Is whether bread, something other than bread, could satiate and serve as the basis of a main meal. And here this section of the Babylonian Talmud says, the fact is that wine does both. It satiates and it makes cheerful, whereas bread satiates but does not make cheerful. Right? If that's the case, let us say Birkat Hamazon after wine. And the Talmud then reasons the reason why Birkat Hamazon is not said after wine is that people do not make it the basis of a meal. Rav Nachman bar Isaac asked Rava, suppose a person makes it the basis of his meal, what then? He replied, when Elijah comes, he will tell us whether it can really serve as a basis. Now, at any rate, no one thinks of such a thing, right? So in the time of the Babylonian Talmud, they were considering, could something else be the basis of a meal? And since it was such an unusual idea that something other than bread could be the basis of a meal, the answer is when Elijah the prophet comes, he'll solve this problem for us. Okay, so it's something that's an interesting issue in the time of the Talmud, but they don't think that it's something so important, and it can wait until Elijah the prophet comes. Okay. Now, the next issue is, could meals come from other sorts of things, right? And here we have in another part of the Talmud, right? Is there a kind of boiled vegetable from which one can make a meal? Rav Ashi applies, the rule applies to a stalk of cabbage, right? So now it's become a main meal, right? It's the main part of a meal, right? And then I argue, and you can see at the bottom, in our time when main meals for many people are not bread-based, it is appropriate to adopt the position of Rabbi Akiva. We recognize that eating habits have changed and that we should no longer consider bread as a determining factor for a main meal. Many people do not eat bread at all, but base their diet on other ingredients. The definition of a main meal should be the satiation of the person consuming the food. A person recognizes the difference between a snack and a main meal that satiates and satisfies a significant part of a person's nutritional needs. A snack is a minor amount of food that tides a person over until a main meal or provides quick energy. It doesn't constitute a main meal. A main meal that provides a significant part of a nutritional needs and leaves a person satiated would constitute a main meal, even if it lacked bread, right? And after eating such a filling meal, a person should recite Birkat Hamazon, right? And if someone's objecting, right, as you will know, Birkat Hamazon is lengthy, right? We, in all our Sidurim, and here I have here the list, we have shortened versions of Birkat Hamazon. So people can't complain, it's too long, right? And so I am arguing, and someone actually put up a question, I think, but I lost it already. Someone will have to help me here.
Unless they wrote it to you personally, I don't see it on the everyone.
Oh, okay, so I don't see it either, okay? So in any case, that is how I'm arguing by using this opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which in the time of the Mishnah and in the time of the Talmud, 1800 years ago, 1500 years ago, was just not the way people ate. But nowadays, it is the way that people ate. Okay, so I think I see something, but it's not on the
Yeah.
top.
Are people who are poor and not necessarily satiated after a meal exempt from saying Berakhot?
Right, and I
Or
would
Marcy.
say that that would be the case, but that also is for us to work on providing meals for people. Now, in this tshuva, I also deal with the issue of non-gluten bread, which I don't have, I think, enough time really to discuss, but I'm certainly invite you to read the rest of my tshuva about non-gluten bread, about Zimun, the communal invitation, and also the issue of washing hands before the meal that we do before ritual acts. Okay. So that was my tshuva in 7 minutes. Are there any questions?
You still want to share screen or you want to go back to the other?
I think we will go back to, I will close this, I think. All right, here we are.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the bracha ha'achrona, please?
Okay, so it would be helpful. Do you have a siddur with you?
I have
Whoever's asking
the bencher.
Okay, so do you have, which bencher? I mean, I should have like grabbed every kind of bencher that's out.
Well, if you want to just, I have Siddur Sim Shalom. I can go after the lesson and look at the pages if you want to just give me a page.
Okay, so in Siddur Sim Shalom, okay, right, on page 754, right, is Birkat Hamazon. Okay. If you look at page 782, so you can see how long Birkat Hamazon is, right, is the one blessing that is the essence of 3, and way on the bottom on page 784 is bracha achrona. That's a blessing for anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right. And I also want to recommend not only the Count Your Blessings booklet, but if you have a phone, right, a smartphone, which I think pretty much everybody does, there's a wonderful app that the Rabbinical Assembly created called the Sanctiful app, full spelled with 2 words. Okay, do you have a recommendation for a family blessing after meals when different members of the family finish fast or slow, but still want to make it a family blessing? So what I would suggest is, in all these Sidurim, right, there are shortened versions of Birkat Hamazon. And so what I would suggest is, and these shortened versions can be pretty short, right? So the one in this Sim Shalom is 2.5 pages, but it has just enough that you can be singing, right? And that would be fun for a family to be singing it together. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Can you repeat that app that you mentioned?
Okay, I will actually try writing it on here. It's called Sanctiful. Okay, and I hope I can send it. Oh, I think I sent it privately when I didn't want to do that. Okay, hold on.
Thank you.
And I can actually also send it to people.
So if I can make a suggestion, it would be wonderful. I know you're trying that you have copies of Count Your Blessings. Okay. It would be wonderful to add that to the Women's League app. So you can have it, easily accessible. And it is now 8:01 on my computer.
Right, because she's in St. Louis.
Oh, right. It's 8:01, right? It's 9:01 on your computer, maybe 7:01 on other people's computer.
And they're West Coasters too with us tonight, so.
That's 7:01.
I have a question.
Yes.
Doing the Berakhot Hamazon with the group is the special feeling of doing it in the group adds to the spirituality. And I was wondering if that in and of itself could be a reason to do Berakhot rather than some other
absolutely and in fact,
version, just because of the added sense of connection that the group has by doing it together.
Absolutely. And what you may not know is the tune to Berakhot Hamazon that we sing was in fact created in the 1950s for Camp Ramah. Because before, the only part of Berakhot Hamazon that was recited together was the Zimun, right? The invitation right at the beginning. And then everybody went on their own, right? And so in Camp Ramah in the 1950s, they were thinking like, the kids, what kids must have been doing during Berakhot Hamazon when each one was doing it on its own, okay, on his or her own. So they decided to have communal singing. And so that's one of the many, many contributions that the conservative Masorti movement have made is to have communal Berakhot Hamazon. And what you may not know is the Siddur for Sfardim and Ashkenazim is somewhat different in the wording. And so you can't really use our Ashkenazi tune to Sephardic Berakhot Hamazon. And I know what Sephardim have done is they've liked it so much to hear an entire room of people or a family around the table singing Berakhot Hamazon. So they have now composed a Berakhot Hamazon tune using Sephardic music styles for the text of the Sephardic Berakhot Hamazon. Right? And I bet like 100 years from now, people will say, oh, this must date from the 1400s or something. But actually it dates from Wisconsin in the 1950s.
And Mindy had a question.
Well, it's not really a question.
Okay.
I'll just say that there is nothing cooler than listening to an entire room do Berakhot at a Women's League event, particularly at convention. It is the most amazing thing. So if you aren't planning to go, that's just my little plug. It's just amazing and cool.
Thank you for beating me through that, because we're actually going to have, just the way we had pre-convention learning about tefillin 2 sessions, we're going to be having pre-convention learning about Berakhot Hamazon, one about teaching the Berakhot Hamazon, what it means, partially what Rabbi Barmesh talked about, and even more so. And then 1 session on how you can sing it. And then we'll have a Shechianu moment at convention that those people who have done this will be leading us at convention in Berakhot Hamazon. So thank you.
When will that pre-teaching happen about Berakhot?
We are hoping to do it after Pesach. I just sat with Barbara Ezring to discuss that. She's actually on an airplane as we speak. On May 7th and 14th. It'll be 2 Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. Webinars also, just like this, a Zoom that will be taping. And don't worry, if you got the emails about this, you'll get emails about the teaching as well.
Okay.
And I never like cutting anyone off, especially when you're engaged in learning, but we have reached our hour of time. Were there any other pressing questions?
I just want to know, are these sessions on the website, the Women's League website? Can we find them if we miss?
Yes, so under, they are on the website. This will take a few days to edit the video and then it'll be on, but it is under programs on our website. And then if you go down, it's the 18-month study, and all of these sessions that have already been done and the text and the studies and the are all on the website, and this will be eventually as well.
The tefillin as well?
Yes. And also one about Merkaz. So don't forget to vote. I hope you all
Please
got
vote.
it.
Please vote. That's very important.
Yes. So Rabbi Barmash, thank you as always. It was something happened with my screen and I don't know where you went now, but thank you very much for teaching us this evening. Yasher kochech for another tshuva being passed. If anyone wants to learn about egalitarian kiddushin, we can have a session on that as well. It's just a very long tshuva paper.
Maybe I'll have to divide it up and, whatever.
Yes. And our next study session for Mishnah Berakhot is chapter 7. Please register. It's with Rabbi Gisa Ederberg on Sunday, April 19th at 1 p.m. And Rabbi is a rabbi in Berlin. And it's the Sunday around the time of Yom HaShoah. It just happened to be that, but I think it's just a wonderful way to show that we are fighting anti-Semitism and fought Hitler, that the rabbi who's teaching us that day will be teaching us Mishnah while in Berlin. And she's associated also with our Frankel Institute, one of our Torah Fund seminaries. So I hope that everyone will register for that on Sunday, April 19th at 1 p.m. with the international difference. That's what we have it then. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. In addition to registering for that, don't forget to register for convention because we're going to have an amazing time and we want you with us for our siyum that day. So, Erev Tov and Shabbat Shalom to all.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.